I spent my entire childhood raising my younger siblings while my parents treated me like their unpaid maid instead of their daughter, only to be abandoned when I finally stood up for myself. What happened next changed everything. My parents expelled me for securing employment, claiming it meant I could no longer provide childcare. Subsequently, they fabricated a story to the entire family when questioned. In response, I unleashed the full truth, exposing their deceit. Now, a mere 2 months after my 17th birthday, they're attempting to compel my return as their new babysitter has resigned. When I first shared the news of my job, their immediate words were, "Who will look after our children now?" While I ought to have been stunned, knowing my parents as I did, I remained unfazed. My counter-question was direct. Who, then, will cover my university tuition? I anticipated this would silence them. They had, after all, consistently maintained that higher education expenses would be my sole responsibility. Yet, instead of yielding, they erupted in laughter, as if my reply were the most amusing thing imaginable. You're a woman, and women should be appreciative of caring for children, whether compensated or not, they declared. In my case, it was clearly uncompensated. My father then interjected with his wisdom. You can't simply be self-centered and abandon your family, Julia. Do you comprehend the current cost of a babysitter for 4 children? I attempted to negotiate, offering a portion of my earnings for them and the kids, but they were uninterested. In their view, since I wasn't dedicating my existence to their offspring, I merited expulsion. They commanded me to gather my belongings and depart. I merely rolled my eyes in defiance. I hurried upstairs, but as I ascended, for the first time in an extensive period, I allowed myself to fully experience it. The anguish, the treachery, and, most profoundly, the sorrow of recognizing I would never truly know a life where my parents cherished me. I didn't even attempt to wipe away the tears, focusing solely on cramming as many garments as possible into a backpack. After 10 minutes, they shouted for me to hasten, and then we departed for my cousin's residence. On the journey there, my parents continually tried to sway my decision. My father reminded me how much my siblings adored me, or more precisely, how only I could calm their cries. Their manipulative tactics weren't even particularly skillful, yet for some reason, I still felt a pang of remorse. I began to question if I truly was selfish. My mother even began weeping, not from missing me, but because they would now be obligated to pay for childcare. So, upon our arrival at my cousin Megan's place, and after they simply drove away without a farewell, my guilt intensified. Especially when Megan opened the door, her face instantly illuminated with delight, and she offered me the first genuine smile I'd witnessed in a long time. Such kindness felt so unfamiliar that the moment we stepped inside, I instantly dissolved into tears. Her expression softened, and she attempted to comfort me, albeit somewhat awkwardly. My dear, why don't you just assist your parents a bit? Help. I had severed friendships, let my academic performance decline, and sacrificed everything to constantly care for their children. I hadn't intended to yell, but the fury within me was uncontrollable. I turned to face her, disgusted by her suggestion, but then I witnessed a look of profound shock on her face. Your parents informed me you were behaving entitled and simply unwilling to help when you had nothing to do all day. I immediately began weeping again, but this time, it was within her embrace. I recounted the entire truth of why I had arrived at her home, all while she held me, assuring me I would be safe under her roof. Surprisingly, she appeared anything but angry, though I would soon discover she harbored much more than mere anger. I eventually cried myself to sleep that afternoon. I didn't awaken until a few hours later, roused by Megan's raised voice from the adjacent room. Hearing the indignation in her tone, I sat up instantly. She was typically a very reserved, timid individual, so this outburst was utterly uncharacteristic. It was evident she was speaking to my parents. I couldn't discern her exact words, but I could tell she was thoroughly reprimanding them. I recall a genuine smile slowly forming on my face. It was the first time someone had truly defended me. When I heard her disconnect the call, I lay back down, feigning sleep. Unaware I was awake, Megan began speaking aloud, something she hadn't done since I was a child. But what she uttered made me bolt upright. Apparently, my parents had already secured a new, free babysitter. They had one available all along. This entire charade had merely been a scheme to remove me from the house permanently. After revealing all this, Megan sighed and remarked that I deserved better before heading to bed. That's when I truly sat up. She was right. I did deserve better parents. And if I couldn't have that, then I at least deserved to regain what was lost. My plan was infallible. You know that one perpetually gossipy aunt every family seems to have? Well, we possess one too. I messaged her every minute, salacious detail of everything that had transpired between my family and me. It amounted to a 1,400-word account. I immediately powered off my phone, gripped by terror of the repercussions. The following morning, when I finally mustered enough courage to reactivate it, my spirit nearly departed my body. My phone was inundated with notifications, not just messages from my gossipy Aunt Barbara, but from virtually every family member whose contact information I possessed. Apparently, Aunt Barbara had taken my lengthy text and, without a moment's hesitation, forwarded it to everyone in the family group chat. I scrolled through the multitude of messages, my heart pounding in my chest. There were dozens. Some individuals defended my parents, claiming I was merely a dramatic teenager, but a surprising number actually supported my stance. My uncle Joseph composed an entire paragraph expressing his disgust with his sister, my mother, for treating me as a live-in nanny rather than a daughter. My grandma Elizabeth sent a message conveying her heartbreak, asserting she had raised her children with greater principles. Megan entered the guest room where I was residing and sat beside me on the bed, her own phone in hand. Megan scoffed, "Are you serious? Barbara thrives on this kind of drama. But honestly, perhaps it's beneficial that everyone is aware of what has been transpiring." I wasn't entirely convinced. On one hand, it felt validating to finally have people believe me. On the other, I knew my parents would be furious, and I still had to determine my next steps. I had a job, but no long-term residence. I was still enrolled in high school, and despite everything, I sorely missed my younger siblings. My phone rang. It was my father. I glanced at Megan, panic surging in my chest, my hands beginning to tremble slightly. Yet I knew I would eventually have to confront them. I inhaled deeply and pressed the accept button, bracing myself for the inevitable outburst. I wasn't disappointed. "What in the world do you think you're doing?" My father's voice was so deafening that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Megan could hear it too, her eyes widening. I didn't even have an opportunity to respond before he continued his tirade. He declared I was dead to him, that I had shamed them before the entire family, and that I could forget about ever returning home. Throughout his entire lecture, I simply sat there, absorbing it all, my eyes welling with tears once more. When he finally exhausted himself, I managed to stammer, "I didn't intend for Aunt Barbara to inform everyone." It was a feeble reply, but it was all I could formulate. "You stupid, ungrateful." He began again, but then I heard my mother in the background. She snatched the phone from him. Her voice was frigid when she spoke. "Julia, you've made your decision. Do not anticipate any support from us moving forward. Not for college, not for your phone bill, nothing." My stomach plummeted. I hadn't even considered all those practical matters. My phone was still linked to their family plan. I had been relying on them for at least some assistance with college. What about my belongings? I inquired, my voice barely a whisper. "You took what you required," my mother replied. "Anything else, we'll donate if you don't arrange to pick it up by the weekend." The call abruptly terminated. I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling utterly overwhelmed. Megan put her arm around me and gave me a comforting squeeze. "Well, that sounded pleasant," she remarked, attempting to lighten the mood. "Don't concern yourself with your possessions. We'll retrieve them tomorrow while they're at work." I nodded, still in a state of disbelief. My parents had essentially disowned me over a part-time job at a coffee shop. What sort of parents behaved that way? The following day, Megan called in sick from work, and we drove to my parents' house. I still possessed my key, so we gained entry without any complications. The house was quiet, my parents were at work, and my siblings were at school and daycare. It felt peculiar being back so soon, as though I were trespassing rather than returning home. I swiftly proceeded to my room and began collecting items I hadn't managed to fit into my backpack the first time. My favorite books, more clothing, my laptop, and some photographs of my siblings that I kept on my desk. While I was packing, Megan was in my parents' home office. I was unaware of her activities, but I remained focused on gathering my belongings and departing before anyone unexpectedly arrived home. When we left, Megan had a folder tucked beneath her arm. I inquired about its contents, and she merely shrugged, stating she would inform me later. We loaded my possessions into her car and drove back to her apartment. Once back at her place, Megan finally revealed what she had acquired. It was a folder containing my birth certificate, social security card, and several other crucial documents. She had also retrieved my parents' spare credit card, which they kept for emergencies. "You're going to need these," she explained, "and they owe you for all the complimentary babysitting." I was stunned. "We can't use their credit card. That's stealing." Megan rolled her eyes. "Relax, we're not embarking on a shopping spree, but you require work attire, a new phone plan, and some fundamental necessities. They owe you at least that much." I was uncomfortable with the idea, but I also saw few alternatives. I had $50 to my name and wouldn't receive my first paycheck for 2 weeks. So, I reluctantly agreed to utilize the card, but only for absolute essentials. We visited the mall that afternoon. I acquired a few black t-shirts and trousers for my coffee shop job, an inexpensive prepaid phone, and some toiletries. In total, we spent approximately $200 on the card. Still, I felt a sense of culpability, even though Megan assured me it was negligible compared to what a professional babysitter would have cost them over the years. The next day marked my inaugural shift at the coffee shop. I was anxious but eager to commence earning my own income. The establishment was called the Daily Grind, super original, I know. Jamie, the manager, was quite amiable and patient with my training. I fumbled a few orders and struggled with the espresso machine, but overall, it wasn't too challenging. Upon returning to Megan's after my shift, I discovered 3 missed calls from an unidentified number. I hesitated before returning the call, concerned it might be my parents from a different phone. It wasn't. It was my younger sister, Emma, using my brother's iPad. She was only 10 but had somehow managed to commit my number to memory. She was crying, inquiring why I had left and when I was returning home. It broke my heart to hear her so distressed. I attempted to explain in a manner she could grasp without disparaging our parents. I told her I now had a job and needed to reside closer to work, and that I still loved her and my other siblings very much. She didn't fully comprehend it, but she made me promise to visit her soon. I promised, even though I had no notion how I would manage it. After that call, I was an emotional wreck once more. Megan suggested we order pizza and watch trivial movies to divert my thoughts. It offered some slight relief, but I couldn't cease contemplating my siblings and how profoundly I missed them. The subsequent days settled into a routine. I would go to work, return to Megan's, complete homework, and repeat. I was constantly exhausted from striving to keep up with school, while working almost daily after classes, but at least I was now earning money. Approximately a week after everything unfolded, I received a text from my Aunt Barbara, asking if I wished to attend Sunday dinner at her house. She mentioned that my grandparents would be present, along with other relatives who desired to see me. I was hesitant. Was this some sort of deception? But Megan believed it would be beneficial for me to connect with supportive family. So, that Sunday, Megan drove me to Aunt Barbara's house. The moment we entered, my grandmother rushed over and enveloped me in a tight embrace. She was weeping, which, in turn, caused me to cry as well. I hadn't realized how desperately I needed a grandmother's hug until that very moment. The dinner proved genuinely pleasant. No one pressured me to discuss my parents, but they unequivocally conveyed their support. My grandfather even discreetly handed me an envelope before we departed. When I opened in the car, I discovered 5 crisp $100 bills inside. I tried to call him to say it was too generous, but he refused to take it back. He stated it was to help me establish myself. That money offered immense relief. I immediately utilized some of it to transition off my parents' phone plan and onto my own. I also established a bank account without my parents' names on it, a suggestion Megan had offered. Things were beginning to improve, until suddenly they weren't. 2 weeks after I moved in with Megan, I returned home from school to find her seated at the kitchen table with a grave expression. "We need to talk," she stated, gesturing for me to sit. My heart sank. Was she going to evict me too? Where would I go? "Your mother contacted me today," Megan continued. "They've noticed the charges on their emergency credit card." I felt ill. I should have realized they would scrutinize the statements or receive a purchase alert. What appeared to be a spare card was actually one they regularly monitored. "What did she say?" I asked. "She accused us of theft and threatened to involve the police if we don't return the card and reimburse every cent," Megan replied with a grimace. "But here's the surprising part. She also wants you to come home." I was utterly shocked. Why would they desire my return after everything that had transpired? Megan's expression turned somber. Because their new babysitter quit after just 1 week. Apparently, for children under 10 are too much for most people. Who would have guessed? I laughed bitterly. Of course, that was the true motive. They didn't miss me. They missed their free childcare. "I'm not going back," I stated resolutely. "I can repay them for the card from my paychecks, but I refuse to return to being their unpaid servant." Megan nodded, appearing relieved. "That's what I informed them, but they're quite distressed about money. Your mom mentioned something about small claims court." I felt a sudden surge of panic. Could they genuinely pursue legal action? Would we face trouble? I still possessed most of the $500 from my grandfather, so I could repay them immediately, but the entire situation left me feeling anxious and incensed. The following day at school was dreadful. I couldn't concentrate on anything. I kept imagining law enforcement appearing to apprehend me for credit card fraud or some similar offense. By lunchtime, I was a nervous wreck. My friend Casey noticed my distress and escorted me outside to the courtyard to converse. I ended up revealing everything to her. She was appalled by my parents' actions. "That's actual child neglect," she asserted. "They can't simply expel you because you secured a job. You're still a minor." I hadn't truly considered it from that perspective. I was so accustomed to being treated as an adult at home that I had forgotten I was still legally a child. Casey's mother was an attorney, and she suggested I speak with her about my options. I was hesitant. I didn't wish to involve more individuals in my family drama, but Casey insisted, and after school, she brought me to her house. Mrs. Thompson, Casey's mother, listened to my entire narrative without interruption. When I concluded, she posed numerous questions about specific details, dates, precise statements, who else was aware of the situation. I answered as accurately as I could. "Julia, what your parents did is unacceptable," she finally stated. "They are legally obligated to provide for you until you reach 18. They cannot simply evict you because you refuse to babysit." She elucidated my available options. I could file for emancipation, which would legally grant me adult status before turning 18, or we could report my parents to Child Protective Services, which might compel them to take me back or place me in foster care. Neither alternative sounded appealing. Emancipation would entail assuming full adult responsibilities when I was already struggling to balance academics and employment, and CPS might also remove my siblings, which I absolutely did not desire. Mrs. Thompson must have perceived my hesitation. She proposed a third choice, having another relative petition for temporary guardianship. This way, I could legally reside with someone like Megan or my grandparents without my parents facing legal trouble. I expressed my gratitude for her guidance and promised to consider it. On the return journey to Megan's, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. It was my younger brother, Alex, using my father's old phone. He conveyed that our parents were constantly arguing now, and the house felt chaotic without me there. My heart ached reading his messages. I missed him and my other siblings profoundly. When I arrived back at Megan's, a surprise awaited me. My grandparents were there, seated in the living room with somber expressions. For a fleeting moment, I assumed something terrible had occurred. "Don't look so concerned," my grandmother stated, patting the sofa beside her. "We simply wish to discuss what happens next." They had learned about the credit card situation from my mother, but unlike my parents, they were not angry. They were worried. They believed I shouldn't be working so excessively while attempting to complete high school. They wanted me to prioritize my education. My grandfather cleared his throat. "We have a proposition for you. We would like you to come live with us until you graduate. We have ample space, and you won't need to work so many hours to support yourself." I was astonished. My grandparents resided in a lovely house approximately 30 minutes from my school. Moving in with them would resolve numerous issues, but I was apprehensive about burdening them. They were in their 70s and likely didn't desire a teenager disrupting their retirement. "We've already discussed it with your parents," my grandmother added, perceiving my hesitation. "They've agreed, provided you visit them and the children every weekend." Of course, they had a stipulation. They still desired access to my free babysitting services. But one day a week was significantly better than every day, and living with my grandparents would be a vast improvement over couch surfing at Megan's, as much as I valued her hospitality. So, I consented. That weekend, I relocated my possessions to my grandparents' house. They had transformed their home office into a bedroom for me. It was small but comfortable, featuring a twin bed, a desk, and a bookshelf. My grandmother had even purchased new bedding and curtains to make it feel like my own sanctuary. The first night there, I slept better than I had in weeks. There was a calming presence in their home, away from the turmoil of my parents' residence, yet still surrounded by family who genuinely cared for me. The next morning was Saturday, which meant I had to face my first visitation with my parents and siblings. My grandmother drove me over, promising to collect me promptly at 6 o'clock in the evening. I was anxious throughout the entire drive. When we pulled up to my parents' house, my siblings came dashing out the front door. Emma launched herself into my arms, and the younger ones crowded around me, all speaking at once. I hugged them tightly, realizing how profoundly I had missed their little faces. My parents stood in the doorway, observing. My mother's expression was inscrutable, but my father appeared irritated, likely because he had endured dealing with the children all morning until my arrival. Once my grandmother departed, I spent the day playing with my siblings, assisting them with homework and catching up on their lives. It was almost like old times, save for the palpable tension whenever my parents were in the room. My mother eventually cornered me in the kitchen while I was preparing lunch for the children. "So, you're too superior to reside here anymore, but you'll accept assistance from your grandparents," she uttered with a sneer. I attempted to maintain my composure. "I'm simply trying to complete high school without becoming homeless," I replied, concentrating on making sandwiches rather than meeting her gaze. "You are never going to be homeless," she scoffed. "You're so melodramatic." I bit my tongue to refrain from pointing out that they were the ones who had expelled me. Instead, I simply carried the plates of food to the dining room for my siblings. The remainder of the day was awkward, but manageable. My father largely disregarded me, which suited me fine. At precisely 6 o'clock, my grandmother's car pulled up outside. I hugged my siblings goodbye, promising to return the following weekend. As I was exiting the door, my mother called after me. "Don't forget to bring your babysitting money next time." I turned, perplexed. "What, babysitting money?" She rolled her eyes. "The $500 you owe us for pilfering our credit card." I was about to dispute it, but decided it wasn't worth the effort. I merely nodded and left. In the car, I informed my grandmother what had occurred. She appeared incensed, but remained silent until we were halfway home. "Your mother always did possess a selective memory," she finally remarked. "She seems to have overlooked all the funds they saved by utilizing you as a nanny for 5 years." I was surprised. My grandmother had never before criticized my parents in my presence. It felt validating to have someone else acknowledge the unfairness of the situation. Life at my grandparents' house quickly settled into a new pattern. I attended school, worked fewer shifts at the coffee shop, and dedicated more time to homework. My academic performance began to improve almost immediately. On weekends, I visited my siblings as agreed, though I dreaded the interactions with my parents. The credit card matter was resolved when my grandfather insisted on settling the debt himself, declaring it was well worth the cost to extricate me from that toxic environment. I pledged to reimburse him, but he dismissed my concerns. A month after moving in with my grandparents, I received some unexpected news at school. My English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, requested I stay after class. She presented an essay I had written about family dynamics and informed me it was one of the finest pieces she had read from a student. "Have you considered applying for college scholarships?" she inquired. "With your writing abilities and grades, you could qualify for some excellent ones." I confessed I hadn't truly been contemplating higher education lately, given all the events in my personal life. Mrs. Rodriguez provided me with information about several scholarship opportunities specifically for students who had overcome adversity. She even offered to assist with my applications. For the first time in months, I felt optimistic about my future. I commenced researching colleges and scholarships with renewed zeal. My grandparents were supportive, assisting me in navigating the applications and even accompanying me on campus tours to a few nearby universities. My parents, however, were less than enthusiastic when they discovered my endeavors during one of my weekend visits. My father observed me working on a scholarship essay on my laptop. "College," he scoffed. "What a waste of money. You should be saving up to acquire your own residence instead of freeloading off your grandparents." I ignored him and continued typing. This only exacerbated his anger. "You realize we aren't contributing a single penny, correct?" he asserted. I looked up at him calmly. "I know. I'm applying for scholarships and financial aid." He seemed disappointed that his statement hadn't perturbed me further. He walked away, mumbling something about ungrateful children who believe they are too good for honest labor. The scholarship applications consumed most of my free time for weeks. Mrs. Rodriguez reviewed my essays, and my grandparents helped me compile all the necessary documents. By the spring, I had submitted applications to 6 different colleges and over a dozen scholarship programs. The first acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday in April. I was admitted to State University with a partial scholarship. I was thrilled, but it still wasn't enough to cover all the expenses. I continued hoping for more favorable news from the other institutions. That same week, something unexpected occurred during my weekend visit to my parents' house. My mother actually inquired about the progress of my college applications. It was the first time she had shown any interest in my future plans. I informed her about the acceptance from State, attempting to maintain a neutral tone since I knew she disapproved. To my astonishment, she offered no sarcastic remarks. Instead, she nodded and stated, "Your Aunt Barbara attended there. She enjoyed it." It wasn't much, but it was the closest thing to support I'd received from either of my parents in months. I decided to interpret it as a positive indication. The next significant news arrived 2 weeks later. I received an email notification that transformed everything. One of the National Merit Scholarships I'd applied for had selected me as a finalist. If I won, it would cover full tuition at any public university in the state for 4 years. I was ecstatic. My grandparents took me out to dinner to celebrate reaching the finals. Even Megan drove over to join us. The finalist interview was scheduled for the following week. I spent days preparing for that interview. My grandmother helped me select a professional outfit, a navy blue blazer and skirt that made me appear older than 17. My grandfather drilled me with practice questions until I could confidently articulate my goals and aspirations. The day of the interview, I was a bundle of nerves. The scholarship committee comprised 5 individuals, all with impressive academic credentials. They inquired about my essay, my experiences, and my plans for the future. I spoke about my desire to become a child psychologist, partly inspired by my own experiences with family dynamics. I left the interview feeling as though I had performed optimally, but I had no idea if it was sufficient. The results wouldn't be announced for another 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I checked my email obsessively, flinching every time my phone produced a notification sound. My grandparents repeatedly urged me to relax, assuring me that whatever transpired, we would find a solution. But I understood the immense impact that scholarship would have on my life. Meanwhile, relations with my parents remained complicated. During my weekend visits, I observed my mother making a greater effort to be civil, occasionally even asking about school. My father was still distant, but at least he was no longer actively hostile. My siblings, of course, were always delighted to see me. Emma had started calling me every few days just to chat, which I cherished. The younger ones would compete over who got to sit closest to me or show me their drawings first when I visited. These moments made the awkwardness with my parents worthwhile. Finally, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the email arrived. I was at my grandparents' house, doing homework at the kitchen table, when my phone chimed with a notification. The subject line read, National Merit Scholarship Decision. My hands were trembling so severely I could barely open the email. My grandmother noticed and came to stand behind me, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder. I took a deep breath and tapped the notification. The email loaded, and I quickly scanned the first paragraph, my heart racing. Congratulations. I didn't even need to read the rest. I had one full tuition for 4 years at any public university in the state. I burst into tears, a wave of relief and joy washing over me. My grandmother hugged me tightly, also weeping. My grandfather emerged from the garage to investigate the commotion, and soon he was celebrating too. That evening, we held an impromptu party. Megan arrived with a cake, and Casey stopped by with balloons. Even Mrs. Rodriguez made an appearance with a gift, a beautiful leather-bound journal for my college years. In all the excitement, I almost forgot to inform my parents. I called them that night, nervous about their reaction but wanting to share my news. My mother answered the phone. I told her about the scholarship, attempting to keep my voice neutral despite my excitement. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Well, she finally stated, I suppose all that studying paid off. It wasn't exactly enthusiastic, but it wasn't negative either. I decided to interpret it as a victory. Does this mean you're definitely relocating for college? She then inquired. I explained that I was still deciding between institutions, but yes, I would likely be living on campus somewhere. There was another pause. The kids will miss you, she remarked, and then so softly I almost didn't hear it. We all will. It was the closest thing to an admission that they cared about me that I'd heard in years. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply thanked her and stated I'd see them on the weekend as usual. After that call, I sat on my bed for a long time, contemplating how much had transformed in just a few months. I had gone from being my parents' live-in nanny to residing with my grandparents and securing a full scholarship to college. It wasn't the path I had anticipated my life would take, but perhaps it was the one I needed. The next day at school, I found myself smiling without reason throughout the day. The future that had seemed so grim just months ago now appeared bright and full of opportunities. I had people who believed in me and supported my aspirations, and I was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, I deserved that support all along. As April transitioned into May, things continued to improve. I spent most of my time at my grandparents' residence, which honestly felt more like home than my parents' house ever did. I still visited every weekend to see my siblings, but those interactions became less awkward as time progressed. My mother actually began engaging in small talk with me, and my father at least ceased glaring at me from across the room. One Saturday in mid-May, something unusual transpired. I was playing with my youngest brother in the living room when my mother entered and simply stood there, observing us. After a few minutes, she cleared her throat. Julia, can we speak in the kitchen for a moment? My stomach immediately nodded. Every time my parents desired a conversation, it concluded with me feeling awful. But I nodded and followed her into the kitchen. She occupied herself making coffee, avoiding my gaze. I merely stood there awkwardly, awaiting whatever bombshell she was about to drop. Your father and I have been discussing, she finally stated, your graduation next month. Oh, right, graduation. With everything else unfolding, I had barely given it a thought. But now that she mentioned it, I realized I had no idea who would attend the ceremony. Would my parents even show up? Would it be incredibly uncomfortable having them and my grandparents in the same space? We want to host a small party for you, she continued, here at the house after the ceremony. I must have appeared utterly astonished because she actually chuckled slightly. Don't look so surprised. You're still our daughter. I was speechless. For months, they had treated me as nothing but uncompensated labor, and now they wanted to throw me a graduation party? It made no sense. Why? I blurted out before I could stop myself. My mother's face softened a little. She set down her coffee cup and finally looked directly at me. Because we're proud of you, she said quietly. The scholarship college, you've done well, Julia. I just stared at her. Who is this woman, and what had she done with my mother? I wanted to ask if she was feeling well or if she'd been abducted by extraterrestrials. Before I could respond, my father walked in. He nodded at me awkwardly, then retrieved a beer from the fridge. Your mom mentioned the party, he asked. I nodded, still too disoriented to form words. Good, he said. We were thinking just family. Your grandparents, Megan, a few aunts and uncles. They were including my grandparents and Megan, the individuals who had essentially rescued me from them. This was growing stranger by the minute. That sounds nice, I managed to articulate. Thank you. My father nodded again and departed the kitchen. My mother returned to fussing with coffee cups. I escaped back to the living room as soon as I could, my head spinning. That night at my grandparents' house, I informed them about the party offer. My grandmother adopted a peculiar expression. Your Aunt Barbara visited them last week, she stated. Had a long conversation with your mother, apparently. That explained a few things. Aunt Barbara was my mother's older sister, and virtually the only person my mother would genuinely heed. If Barbara had confronted her about her treatment of me, it might have resonated in a way no one else could. So, should I allow them to host this party? I inquired. Or, is it some sort of trap? My grandfather chuckled. Not everything is a trap, Julia. Sometimes people simply recognize they've made errors and wish to rectify them. I wasn't entirely convinced of that, but I decided to grant them the benefit of the doubt. I texted my mother the following day, stating I would like to have the party. She responded with a thumbs-up emoji, which was probably the most enthusiastic reply I had ever received from her. The next few weeks flew by amidst finals and graduation preparations. I was ranked 12th in my class, which meant I would be permitted to wear one of those elaborate honor cords with my cap and gown. My grandparents were so proud they took me shopping for a new dress to wear beneath my gown. Casey and I spent an entire Saturday embellishing our caps. I inscribed, nevertheless, she persisted, on mine with glittering gold letters. It felt fitting, given everything I had endured. Graduation day arrived with perfect June weather. I woke early, too excited and apprehensive to sleep in. My grandmother prepared her special blueberry pancakes for breakfast, and my grandfather continuously took photographs of me, as if I were a toddler embarking on my first day of kindergarten. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon. When we arrived at the school, the parking lot was already teeming with families carrying balloons and flowers. I immediately spotted my parents' car. It was impossible to miss with all 4 of my siblings' faces pressed against the windows, waving frantically at me. I waved back, feeling a strange blend of emotions. Part of me still harbored resentment for everything they had done, but another part was simply grateful they had appeared. I had to go line up with the other graduates while my family secured seats in the auditorium. Casey found me in line, and we took selfies with our decorated caps. The entire experience felt surreal, as if I were observing myself in a film about high school graduation rather than actively experiencing it. The ceremony itself was quite standard, monotonous speeches from the principal and valedictorian, the band playing Pomp and Circumstance on an endless loop as we proceeded across the stage. When my name was called, I heard cheering from multiple sections of the audience. My siblings were the loudest, of course, but I could also discern Megan's voice and my grandfather's distinct whistle. Afterward, in the pandemonium of families locating their graduates, I was enveloped in a whirlwind of embraces and photographs. Emma wouldn't release her grip on my waist, and my youngest brother kept attempting to snatch my cap. My parents actually looked proud, my father patting me on the back, and my mother fussing with my hair for pictures. As we were walking to the parking lot, Casey ran up to offer me one last hug. Coming to Tyler's party tonight? She asked. I shook my head. Family engagement, I stated, gesturing toward my parents. Perhaps I can stop by later, she shrugged. Text me if you manage to escape, she said with a wink before darting off to join her own family. We all caravaned back to my parents' house. My parents' car filled with my siblings, my grandparents in their vehicle, and me riding with Megan. As we drove, Megan kept glancing at me. Are you all right? She finally inquired. I nodded. Just peculiar, you know. A few months ago, they expelled me, and now they're hosting a graduation party. Megan smiled. People can surprise you sometimes. Not always in negative ways. When we arrived at the house, I was astonished to see balloons tied to the mailbox and a "Congratulations, graduate" banner draped over the front door. Inside, the dining room table was laden with food, and there was even a cake adorned with my name. More relatives arrived. Aunt Barbara, who hugged me so vigorously I thought my ribs would fracture. Uncle Joseph, a few cousins I hadn't seen in ages. Even Mrs. Thompson, Casey's mother, who had provided me with legal counsel, stopped by with a gift card. The party was genuinely enjoyable. My siblings were impeccably behaved, my parents were strangely amiable, and everyone kept expressing how proud they were of me. I kept anticipating the other shoe to drop, for someone to mention babysitting or for my father to make some disparaging comment about college being a waste of time. But it never occurred. After cake, my mother announced it was time for presents. There were the usual graduation gifts, money, gift cards, a new laptop from my grandparents that nearly brought me to tears. But then my parents handed me a small box. Inside was a key. I looked at them, bewildered. It's to our house, my mom explained. We want you to know you always have a home here, even when you're away at college. I simply stared at the key, utterly speechless. My father cleared his throat. We didn't handle things well, he stated awkwardly, when you secure that job. We were wrong to expel you. Was this truly happening? Was my father actually acknowledging their error? I glanced around to see if anyone else was as shocked as I was, but everyone was simply smiling as if this were entirely normal. Your Aunt Barbara reminded us that parents are meant to support their children, not the reverse, my mother added. We took advantage of you, Julia, and we are sorry. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, an actual apology from my parents. I half expected the ceiling to collapse or for aliens to suddenly invade. We're also sorry about the babysitting, my father stated. We've engaged a proper childcare provider now for when you're not present. I looked at my grandparents, who were beaming with pride. My grandmother offered an encouraging nod. Thank you, I finally managed to say. That means a great deal. The rest of the party passed in a haze. By the time everyone departed, it was almost 9 o'clock in the evening. I texted Casey that I wouldn't make it to Tyler's party after all. I was too emotionally drained to handle a high school celebration. My grandparents were the last to leave. As they were exiting, my grandmother pulled me aside. Your parents contacted us last week, she said quietly. They wanted to know if we would assist them with your college expenses, whatever the scholarship doesn't cover. I was stunned all over again. They did. She nodded. People can evolve, Julia. Sometimes they simply require a wake-up call. After everyone had departed, I found myself alone in the kitchen with my parents. An awkward silence filled the space as we all avoided eye contact. So, my mom finally stated, "You're all set for State University in August?" I nodded. Yes, orientation is in July. I was assigned to Thompson Hall. That's on the north side of campus, right? My dad inquired. Near the library? I was surprised he knew that. Yes, it is. How did you know? He shrugged. I looked it up. Wanted to know where you'd be living. We fell into another silence, but it felt less uncomfortable this time, more like we were all simply adapting to this new normal. You know, my mom said hesitantly, if you wanted to move back home for the summer, there's space. I considered it for a moment. Part of me wanted to immediately decline, but another part recognized that they were attempting, in their own awkward manner, to make amends. I'll think about it, I stated. I promised Grandma I'd help her with her garden this summer, but perhaps I could split my time. They both nodded, seemingly content with that response. My dad checked his watch. It's getting late. Would you like us to drive you back to your grandparents? I shook my head. Megan's coming back to get me in a few minutes. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Megan, saying she was en route. I started gathering my graduation gifts. Leave some of it here if you wish, my mom suggested, for when you visit. When Megan's car pulled up outside, my parents walked me to the door. My mom surprised me with a hug, and my dad awkwardly patted my shoulder. Congratulations again, my mom said. We truly are proud of you. As Megan drove me back to my grandparents' house, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. I had transitioned from being a complimentary nanny who was prohibited from having a job to a soon-to-be college student with a full scholarship. I had discovered who genuinely supported me when difficulties arose, and I had learned that I was far more resilient than I ever realized. But most surprisingly, I had learned that sometimes people can indeed change. My parents weren't flawless, not even close, but they were making an effort, and for now, that was sufficient. I gazed down at the house key in my hand. Perhaps I would spend some time at home this summer after all, not because I was obligated to, but because I desired to on my own terms. And that made all the difference.